right, welcome to Borderlines. It is Friday, December 13th,
Friday the 13th.
2024. Canada is not yet the 51st state of the United States, but rumors and X and Blue Sky and Truth Social are a swirl. And we are joined today by Ryan Rosenberg, who is a partner at Larley Rosenberg, the managing
Your
partner,
partner.
my managing partner at
Hmm.
Larley Rosenberg.
God help
And
you.
as some of the people walking by the office were saying, oh, he's finally going on. And the topic today, well, first, Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be fun. The topic today is Americans moving to Canada. Ryan registered during the first Trump presidency, the website Trumpugees.ca or .com?
It's
CA.
.ca. So
.ca.
I can tell you the story really quickly. It was
Yeah.
so like my first election cycle, U.S. election cycle as a lawyer was when Bush two was running for his second term, and
Bush
back
2. That's amazing.
I know, right? I know I just aged us because I think Deanna, you and I are around the same vintage, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So back then there was an email chain floating around because this is before we like had social media at the level we do now. Remember we used to share like funny email chains. So there's a
Mhm.
funny email chain about Bushugees, and it's all about how these like blue state Americans
Oh my
were
God.
sneaking across the border in the middle of the night with like cases of wine in their cars and running from Rush Limbaugh and stuff like that. So that's the first time I saw the UG suffix on anything other than a refugee. And I thought it was really, really funny. And I kind of carried that with me for a number of years through the election cycles. And we later called them Obama UGs. Those were mostly the libertarians who wanted to come to Canada to avoid socialized medicine and gun control and same-sex
God
marriage.
forbid.
Yeah, God
Yeah.
forbid, right? Out of the frying pan into the fire. Like ultra libertarian types. I even spoke at a conference called Escape from America in Scottsdale. It's a whole other story. Anyways, they none of them showed up. And then we continued to kind of play with this suffix. And when Trump put his name forward to be the Republican nominee on that day, that's the day I bought Trumpugees.ca as a domain. So it's before he was even the Republican nominee. Watching
Wow.
him, yeah. So watching him kind of win that election, I don't know, I just didn't do anything with it. Like with the domain, I was too busy. I didn't know how to build a website. I didn't feel like investing in a website that was really just a joke, and just sort of left it alone. Um, and then during the Biden campaign, during the Biden presidency, my domain ownership expired, and I just let it go. I didn't care. And then the Tuesday after the election last month, I was like, hey, I should see if this is still a thing. So I went back to GoDaddy. I bought the domain at 11 a.m. I used a bunch of AI tools that I've been working with in my own practice, as well as some through GoDaddy. And by noon, I had the website live.
I love how you
Wow.
like missed the opportunity during the first Trump presidency. You're like,
Yeah.
oh well,
Yeah,
opportunity lost. And lo and behold, he's back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the
exactly,
funny part
exactly.
too is that in the meantime, like Trump UGs, because I had never heard of Bush UGs or Obama UGs before, but Trump UGs was something that like I heard in common parlance like pretty regularly during the time
Mhm.
of of Trump's previous tenure. So yeah, there was your entrepreneurial opportunity
Well, yeah,
It
we've
seized.
told
was,
him he should be registering Xi Jinping G, Orban G, Modi G, Putin G. Like,
it's really just like a dad joke gone
Honestly.
bad, right? Like it's like not even it shouldn't even be a thing, but this time around it got picked up by the Canadian press and I ended up doing a bunch of media with it. And so it was in the Globe and Mail, National Post, and then Maclean's magazine did a piece on it. And it's been really fun because it's taken me out of my everyday of like grinding out work permit applications for big companies. So um
And it is a
yeah.
real thing. Like it's a real phenom in the way that, like, I mean, probably Canada would not be the most obvious choice for people wishing to escape the libertarians seeking to escape the Obama
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
healthcare thing, but in a situation where people are looking to escape Trump, people do tend to be looking at Canada as a kind of Valhalla, like this is going to be better here.
I don't know if it started with the draft dodgers during the Vietnam War or if it was before that, but I think Canada's always been that's it, I'm moving to Canada escape
Mhm.
hatch for Americans who are unhappy with their electoral decisions, as
And
they
there
would say.
Yeah.
actually is interest.
Oh,
There,
yeah.
yeah, there was tons of interest.
And
There's like,
people following through. It's not just, it's not all of them obviously
yeah,
follow through or even a huge number, but there are people planning their moves.
there are,
Yeah.
and there were people who moved last time as well, but there's so many limiting factors, and I'm finding that this time it's very, very different because the, we've we've always gotten busy with Americans calling us around election cycles, and
Mhm.
the cohort calling us has always changed. Like I mentioned, the libertarians during Obama's campaign. When Trump won his first election, it was mostly ethnic minority groups. These were people who were like scared that they were going to be trampled. There was definitely a higher representation, at least in my inbox, from people from his um, shithole country list, and that turned into a travel ban list.
Yeah.
And so it was different. This time, what I'm seeing is a much wider and broader scope. It's not just the
Agreed.
overly memed crying liberals. It's everyone just left of Trump all the way to the far left. So you even have people who are probably right of center reaching out saying, I don't like this direction.
Yeah.
For
Even
sure.
the 2020 campaign, when the border was shut, we saw the uptick of Americans looking just,
Mhm,
it was interesting because he was president and there were concerns of like if he was reelected, what would
mhm,
Oh,
happen? And it was a lot more
yeah,
complicated to
exactly.
move then.
Exactly. Well, I mean, during the first term in office, I saw the biggest peak around the time of the executive orders, as you said, Ryan, where for me, it was primarily really sophisticated academics, like people who were doing very, very deep research in the scientific fields, generally from places like Iran, where they were
mhm.
doing like cancer research or things like that. And they just felt like the kind of anti-science mentality. And also not just about the approach to academia in general, but also that like I have a sick parent. If I go and see that sick parent, I probably will never be able to return to my home and my
Right.
family. And so, but people that were like renowned scholars,
Mhm,
postdoc fellows who were doing like world leading research and things that were like, I want out.
mhm.
And it just seemed to me like such a strange moment. And they were still kind of hedging their bets because they were like, I don't really want to leave, but I've been told that essentially I'm not kind of wanted and that I have my status is suddenly insecure. So I found that really, really odd. I mean, I imagine that it's probably the similar for the two of you in terms of the type of thing, or were there specific other specific groups that you were seeing largely during the first administration?
During the first administration, that what you just said, yeah, was true in my practice as well. There were, uh, uh, I mean, similar cohorts. We also had like some companies that wanted to set up Canadian subsidiaries to
Yeah,
accommodate
yeah,
American employees who didn't want to be there.
yeah.
But yeah.
I think based on our stage of practice, people come to us for very specific reasons. And so
Hmm.
like I think that it makes sense that companies would be going to you or perhaps even to both of you. Whereas, and for me, I found that a lot of people would want to take it to a certain point so that they would have somewhere to jump ship to. And
Hmm.
then as the government changed again, I don't know if a lot of them followed through on those plans. They thought that maybe they were okay, but I don't know what's going to
Yeah.
happen
uh,
now.
So like this time around, we're seeing, like I mentioned before, we're seeing like everyone just sort of left with Trump. We're also seeing a lot of like retirees. I have a whole collection of emails say I'm 78 years old, have $800,000 in the bank, and I want to move to New Brunswick. Like,
That's the biggest group I'm seeing right now
yeah,
too, as well. Yeah.
yeah. And so there's that group. And then I'm also seeing a lot of the ultra high net worth and high net worth crowd. And the truth with a lot of these folks, at least ones I've spoken to, some of them have had enormous exits from companies in previous years.
Hmm.
And they haven't worked, and they can't buy your way into Canada anymore. So
Yeah, I know, but they
there's a
have
lot
huge assets, huge,
huge
and they're
huge
like, I can
assets.
set
Yeah.
up companies and employ this many people.
Yeah, but they don't want to. Like a lot of them have been living a lifestyle that I've spoken to anyways that doesn't involve any meaningful work.
Yeah,
And so no work experience in the last 10 years, and a massive asset base. So in those cases, even if we could figure out a way to, put together a plan that involves starting a business, earning Canadian work experience, whatever, you know all the options.
yeah,
Um, their American patriotism is protected by the pocketbook. As soon as you get them tax
Hmm.
advice, they back down and they go, well, that's a really big tax bill. And this, we have elections every 4 years. Let's just see how it goes before I start
yeah,
spending millions of dollars in taxes and professional fees to
mm,
sort this piece out. So
yeah,
I
I think
noticed that
there's,
during the first administration that after the first Trump tax cuts, there was a bit of a pause of some companies and everything.
yeah.
yeah. That's right. Just what you said there, Ryan, too, and also just the idea, the sort of first point that you made that we're really not set up for passive investment immigration.
Yeah.
That like, unless you're intending to roll up your sleeves and get back in as in an active way, Canada really
Hmm.
doesn't have any interest in you. And the idea of, well, I have a kid who could perhaps be my emissary, can come in and start something and then pass it along to me, that because of the basically the death of the parents and grandparents program,
Yeah.
that's also not a thing that people want to explore it, but then eventually they're like, well, this isn't the easy path that I thought it was going to be.
And all of those plans exceed an election cycle, right? In terms of
Mhm.
duration. So like,
For sure.
if they've lost all faith in their country, sure. But I think a lot still holds hope that things will go back to the way they see it as meant to be.
Yeah. And we'll see. Like we mentioned, how the executive orders prompted a big push. There's been reports that Trump plans on bringing those back
Hmm.
as an
On day one.
executive order on day one.
Yeah.
So, and especially like it's the Persian community was probably the most hit by that before. So whether there's interest there. So I think we know what the
For
push
sure.
factors may be during a Trump presidency.
There's another
Um,
group though that I need to mention, which is any parent of any Soji-esque child, like
right.
a kid who's like in transition, who has
Oh
gender
yeah.
identity,
And the
like
Soji-esque person themselves is an adult.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing many more parents
Hmm.
at this particular moment. And I think also there's like a lot of parents who are alarmed by like the state of violence in schools, and have anticipate that situation is going to get worse rather than better. And so again, this is a lot of it, people with political affiliations left of Trump, anywhere left of Trump, where there's again this sense of alarm, like I need to get my kid out, I'm worried about
Hmm.
having like affirming healthcare and all of this kind of stuff. And so this actually does get into this space, and I think we can push this down the road a little bit in our conversation today about like people asking, truly, is there such a thing as a refugee claim from the United States?
Yeah, we can definitely come back to that. Um,
Hmm.
in terms of what the scene in Canada is, I saw that on Twitter, Ben Shapiro, who's a huge conservative commentator in the US, retweeted or quote tweeted a celebrity was saying, that's it, they're moving to Canada. And Ben Shapiro just posted the picture of Pierre Poilievre eating the apple, which has come to symbolize, the like, for those who don't know the video, it's Poilievre basically, for lack of, talking with a journalist and kind of schooling the journalist in the conversation, eating this apple, with Ben Shapiro's point being, well, the conservatives there are going to be restrictive. We know up here it's already restrictive. We've talked on the podcast before about how Canada's going to be trying to shrink its population. So in this atmosphere, like what options do Americans have? Like, what are you
Uh,
telling people who are asking, say, either starting a business or retiring?
so the first point is, testing the seriousness of wanting to leave and whether this is about coming to Canada or leaving the United States. And if it's about leaving the United States, the advice is, we're probably not a long-term durable solution. We might have a short-term temporary solution to get you, out of that immediate situation. But if you want something longer term, um, look at Panama, look at the Caribbean, look, make Aliyah if you're Jewish. Like there's all sorts of other options that we're kind of pointing people to if it's really just about leaving because there's a true anxiety or fear about safety or future generations of their family or what have you. So that's usually the starting point. And then as far as, you know, looking at the Canadian piece, which is why they're on the call with us anyways, or having those discussions, it's so bespoke, like it really, really is. And, I've been trying to just it's been an interesting conversation because a lot of times we're letting people down easy. We're saying, you're trying to get onto, you're getting in line to get on a bus that just got a lot shorter. That we don't have nearly as many seats as we have demand for tickets. So you have to be, as Deanna said, ready to roll up your sleeves, get to work, go back to school, start a business, find a job, whatever it is, unique to their circumstances.
Because I think a lot of them, or at least a significant number, assume that there may be special programs for Americans as part of some Monroe Destiny thing. Are there, advantage like what if an American does want to come here, what would generally be the steps that they would take? Let's just say if they want, I think the most common scenario would be that at least I encounter is they want to continue working for their US company
Mhm.
and get permanent residency in Canada.
Yeah, it's funny that you to phrase it that way because there's I one thing I've noticed with these days is there's certainly a sense of entitlement. I'm American, I'm coming. No, you're not. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You don't have a right to be here. We aren't the 51st state
Yet.
yet.
Yeah.
That would kill our business, right? Like, that would be the end of Trumpugees. But if people wanting to work in Canada were, you know, again, it's so bespoke, but like we're asking people to look at whether their companies have Canadian offices, whether they're willing to set up Canadian offices, whether they could um, take on a lifestyle instead of perhaps of like a reverse snowbird. Come up for 6 months at a time, extend if you need to, go back and forth, manage your lifestyle that way if it's just about not being in the United States. Um, but really, the advice comes down to this very basic idea. There's two groups of clients. There's clients that have an opportunity and need a visa, and there's clients that want a visa and will take any opportunity. And if you have to wake up and get out of bed every day and do something for a period of time to secure a future for yourself, make sure it's something you want to do. So the advice is always for me, if you don't have that opportunity, you're not going to be happy living a visa lifestyle. Go find the opportunity. Figure out what kind of work you want to do. Figure out if you want to go to school. Figure these things out and make these decisions so that the lifestyle living in Canada is a lifestyle you want to live. And it's not just about not being in the United States.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that
and I think if you're looking for this to be like an easy way of just transporting, maintaining the status quo, except that you're doing it from Canada, I don't think that things are set up for that at all.
No, not at
Uh,
all.
no, and I think that that is kind of a rude awakening. So we're doing this like constant miseducation campaign in this line of work. And I think people are having to make extremely tough decisions. Like even you made the comment about making Aliyah, if you're Jewish, like you're choosing between, one difficult situation in the United States and an equally difficult one if you're deciding to relocate to Israel. So like, I mean, people are making very difficult decisions right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that when you're talking to people that are accustomed to having a certain type of privilege, and then you're like, okay, well, if you're wanting to get away from there, you're going to have to really think about whether or not you're
Mm-hmm.
going to work and earn this because you don't have a green card, so to speak, to come into Canada. You're starting from scratch, and
Exactly.
it's not going to be just a cakewalk.
For sure.
now what about some people may be saying, well, what about NAFTA, CUSMA, USMCA in the United States? Does that offer like what Americans who are interested in coming up to Canada, what can they take away from that treaty?
Well, yeah, if you want to talk about like substantively, for sure. I mean, we do have the NAFTA, or sorry, CUSMA investor program. We have other LMIA exemptions that allow business owners to operate a business in Canada. And they have to be prepared to put skin in the game and develop a business plan. Again, like I said before, to live the lifestyle that they want, make sure it's a business they actually want to operate and actually want to invest money in, create jobs, submit an application, wait for processing. A lot of these investor type active business investment work permit applications need to be made before you arrive in Canada or after you arrive in Canada, and then you end up waiting around forever for a decision. So it's a real commitment. So it's not just like draft a business plan that works. Like you really need to do this if you
Mhm.
want it to be durable for yourself and your family long term.
The word that jumps out at me, Ryan, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is the word active. And
Yeah.
so it strikes me in other areas, I don't do any of this business stuff, but it strikes me that like um, just dealing with immigration determinations in other areas, that immigration officers have become very live to like what is essentially a bullshit plan and what is
Hmm.
something that actually sounds real and viable, and this is actually something you're going to do, and not just something that feathers the nest for you to basically take advantage of free healthcare. They don't sort of consider, well, you might get better care there. They're just looking at it from a
Yeah.
like, they're operating from a set of assumptions, right? That's like,
Hmm.
you're going to get this all for free. We're going to have to give you these things. Why would we give them to you? That sort of approach. What do we get from you? It's like, what have you done for me lately? Is kind of the approach that immigration officers have.
Yeah.
I think the genuineness of it, and we've seen this in some of the changes to the ICT provisions and some of the language in the FTA bulletins, that there's a real pushback on this sort of self-employment, transfer yourself in, use immigration as a vehicle to achieve some personal end, as opposed to using it to achieve something that has um, a different type of opportunity, like a legitimate business opportunity attached to it.
Do you
Yeah,
see that getting stricter for Americans as well? Because as you were saying before, there's like the two types of people who are coming here, the people who have the opportunity and the people who just want to immigrate. And I think
Yeah.
historically with Americans, it's been like they have a comparable standard of living. So if they're coming, we can presume that there's actually a legit opportunity. Do you foresee in the next few years that getting stricter?
Good question. I haven't really thought about it like that before. And I haven't really like focused on this value proposition that Canada offers, like as Deanna's mentioned it, like this trade-off for healthcare, especially for the business investor class of client, because a lot of them are so well funded and used to paying for having their well-insured benefits anyways, that I don't necessarily think it's the socialized healthcare that's driving those decisions.
no,
No,
It's
I think
something
if anything,
else.
it's becoming a deterrence.
no, I
For
agree
sure.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I've
agree
had
too,
plenty
but
of
I just don't think
Americans like
that,
they want to be close to the border, like they want to immigrate but maintain their U.S. healthcare plan
for
Exactly.
sure.
because
Yeah.
they want healthcare. So it's
I
Yeah.
just don't think that that's what immigration officers see, you know, like I think that
Yeah.
there is a total disconnect between what immigration officers are going to consider and what the reality is as to what somebody wants, you know. I'm just not sure. Like I think part of my fundamental issue is that I don't really understand what is considered the Canadian value proposition, both
Mm.
from the perspective of the applicant and from the perspective of what Canada's looking for right now. Like I don't quite get what we're
Well,
looking for.
I think the key to most good immigration applications is to tie the officer's hand and take all those discretionary biases off the table. I take a very recipe card approach to my practice, and if you satisfy all criteria, you should get the results you deserve. And I make this point to clients all the time that are, and I don't think that people practicing in other areas of immigration feel the same way. But our administrative system is complicated, but if you harness it properly, you get predictable outcomes. And I think that's probably only
yeah.
true in the economic field and select family type of applications. But
And
it's
especially
absolutely,
at the border when you're like before
yeah,
a human being.
yeah, exactly. So if you know how to leverage the system's predictability, then these other issues sort of come off the table. And it's just more about like whether you can satisfy program criteria to get what you've asked for. And so
Right.
I think it's the bigger policy question about whether we should be allowing Americans in and what are we giving Americans in exchange for the right to be here, is an interesting discussion. But how you actually get them here is very different than that discussion, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I think perhaps my confusion arrives from the fact that like most of the clients that I have are in the groups that clearly Canada has said we don't want this
Yeah,
group. And so you kind of are left at odds, like, what do we do with somebody who like, as an advocate, you feel that there's
yeah,
great merit in that person,
for sure.
but just a shrinking space in our programs and policies for that person to be able to make an avenue to
Oh, and I'm not sure that like, yeah, I mean, in terms of what like British Columbia is looking for, and I know the programs are all going to change in 2025, but there's an issue in terms of like, British Columbia is looking for people to not live in Metro Vancouver. And there are Americans making very significant dollars in Vancouver where the points aren't adding up right now just because of the way the points thresholds work. So I think that um, what Canada is looking for does need a big rethink.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's right. Like, I mean, we all know how the point system plays out, but when you think about who is actually able to meet those points thresholds and who does not, um, I do kind of, I do, like it's puzzling to me as to what Canada's actually trying to position itself in terms of who we're attracting and who we're trying to retain.
yeah. I think if you want to answer that question about the future, the answers are probably in the past. I think my take, 22 years into practice is that Immigration Canada is probably the most environmentally savvy department out there. All of their decisions are recycled. Everything is reused. They don't let anything go to waste except for money and time. But programs, oh man, they love digging up old programs. I think there was an article in the Globe just the other day talking about how Canada should really revisit going back to a federal skilled worker based immigration
Yeah.
prioritize federal skilled workers. It's like, well, we've been there, done that. I'm sure we'll go back to there again. We're saying how there's no passive investor program. I bet in the next number of years we'll see a passive investor program. I wouldn't be surprised if it looks like the EB5. If we use it to solve our housing problems, invest $5 million in housing, we'll give you PR. These sorts of ideas are all from the past,
Hmm.
and I think that's where we're headed.
There was a
Back to
program
Interesting.
that they recently announced that was fully recycled. We were talking about it on Slack, and I can't for the life of me remember
remember which one it was.
what it
Yeah, it
was, and it's
was.
going to bug me.
Yeah,
It's not
I'm actually bugging
the
too.
assisted family member one, is it? Like that's one that I know has been tossed around a little bit, where if you want to sponsor a family member, there has to be like it's sort of like a hybrid between an economic and not just a sponsorship, but there. Anyways, obviously it's not that one because
Yeah.
you guys are
I
giving me
mean, one
blank
thing they brought
stares.
back almost word for word is the program delivery instructions on how to assess TRVs, going from
Yes, yes,
single
yeah,
entry
yeah,
to
yeah,
multiple and back and
yeah,
forth.
yeah. The
Um,
Yeah,
pendulum swing for sure.
yeah. I'm curious. We were talking about the FTAs and the ICT, like the intra-company transfers, and they put down the new policy directives. And I know at least at our firm, there's been a lot of conversation about like, does this policy directive around intra-company transfers apply also to the free trade agreements? Like, does it apply also to interpretation of applications under the CUSMA or the CCTPP, whatever that's called?
Sure.
And so, I mean, from my from my perspective, they didn't speak specifically to what it says, like whether or not, yes, it does apply to things under CUSMA, but or no, it doesn't. But it seems to me that they wrote it in such broad language that I think it's reasonable to assume that they're wanting those more strict interpretive guidance to be applied to the free trade agreements as well. But
so I
I
don't
don't
know
know
if you
what your
saw
thoughts
it.
are.
Tamara tweeted and posted on the listserv that the guidance is going to be clarified because it's inaccurate in places. So until that's done,
And
it's a bit
soon, a
hard to
month
know.
ago, right? A month
Yeah,
ago, they
soon.
said
It's going
soon.
to be done soon. I actually
Yeah.
messaged Tamara about that saying, "Oh, soon," and she said, they told me the C-20 guidance was going to be updated soon 5 years ago. So
Right. That's
Yeah,
like the policy around caregivers. Soon, new
we
program
were told at the
soon.
national conference in Ottawa 2 years ago that we would have a digital nomad policy soon. I
Of
mean,
course.
this is, yeah, it's one thing
Yeah.
after another. But
Soon.
on that stuff about whether it applies to the FTAs, I think a lot of the confusion stems from how the programs are very, very similar, um, but like the general provisions under GATS and the general ICT provisions are very much a blanket to fill any gaps for countries that don't have FTAs. And I do think that they're different standards.
yeah.
And I think that'll become more clear as we move forward.
And I think, I mean, as the reaction to Trump's tariff threat has indicated, like Canada needs that border to be as open as possible. So, and when we're talking here, like that's about tariff is the levy imposed on imports, but the movement of people and the ability of Americans to come up and invest in Canada is extremely important to the Canadian
Mhm.
economy. So,
Mhm.
we've talked about how there's going to be a cap on work permits in total. At least under CUSMA, they aren't allowed numerical limits, which is part of why I've said I don't understand how these caps are all going to work. But keeping the border open is very important. I do think, I don't know. I mean, the dark horse prediction that I have for next year that I've talked with Ryan about anyways, and I think you, Deanna, is that I think in 2025, and again, this is just a prediction, that they're going to end the ability of all port of entry work permit applications in order to facilitate this cap. So I'm just curious, like, Ryan, you do a lot of work permits for Americans. How would your practice and your company clients practice it or businesses all change if they had to do all American work permits online?
I mean that's sort of the nuclear option, hey? Like if Canada shut down port of entry work permit applications, um, there would need to be something in its place. I just can't. It's just not. Um, it's unthinkable that someone coming up to work on a publicly funded multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project in Toronto or Vancouver has to wait 6 months and the project timeline is 4 years. It doesn't make sense. So I think it would be so catastrophic. And I don't think that it would feel very much like a very big step back. I don't I just can't see how it would happen without expanding the overseas network and entirely gutting and rebuilding our online work permit application infrastructure, like in a very,
I'm
very
sure that
serious
they'll have
way.
a portal though. Don't
Yeah,
worry,
but
Ryan.
it's not. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure exactly. I'm sure the portal of portals. But
And
just the
Chinook
time
will help
consumed.
bulk process them quickly.
Yeah,
So
seriously.
the way I
Why
think this
are you
is,
worried? Yeah.
I think the way this is going to happen, I think they're just going to um, let the potholes along the road get deeper and not patch them up. We're starting to see this with
Hmm.
increased language requirements for consular-based work permit applications. We're starting to see uh, like checklist no's on applications. You know, if you miss a box, like we've seen it feels like a very deliberate heightening of sensitivity
Hmm.
to even the smallest concern on an application. So I think we're going to
Hmm.
see refusal rates increase quite significantly as a way
Yeah.
to keep numbers down.
Well, this has become a kind of a Canadian brand, which is that like they make it so decrepit
Yeah.
that you don't use it because it's so infuriating. Like that's how the LMIA process has become. That like it's basically a form of torture to have to go through that process. So it deters employers from using it,
Hmm.
and then therefore, wait, cool,
Yeah.
less foreign worker applications. Yes, there is a huge uptick of fraud, um, and non-compliance, and but you have to be savvy. It's sort of also like how it worked during COVID, where there might be an exemption that would allow you to apply at the port of entry, but if you're not eligible for that exemption, then you apply via the visa office or something like that, like trying to like
Sure.
develop more of a two-tier system. And so only the best and the brightest will be able to get that elite service, and otherwise you're getting the um,
So this happens all the time, and like what it's the classic squeezing one end of the balloon, right? So if they start shutting off these avenues, where's everyone going to go? Like we've seen all these like refugee claims in the last couple of years, especially this past year. Like for these students who have no other options, postgrad students have no other options. It's wild, like to see everyone rush to
Mhm.
that being their solution.
Yeah.
I feel like at least in our practice, maybe it's just the type of work we're doing here. We've seen a massive decrease in recent years in marriage of convenience cases. Maybe that's the next thing. Maybe we'll see more of those. Maybe we'll see everyone run to H&C applications. Maybe we'll see people
That's
find,
already happening. That's
yeah.
already happening. Yeah. And I mean, the thing that's sad about it is that like the H&C applications and the refugee claims, I'm obviously not dealing with the people saying, make up a fake story, let's go. But there are some cases where
Yeah.
they're incredibly sad cases and they just didn't do them at the beginning. And it's like, is it going to win? I would say it's maybe a 50, 60, 70% chance rather than a 90 or 100% chance, but
Hmm.
it's not a bogus refugee claim. It's just
Hmm.
like, when somebody decides, am I going to do a study permit application or a refugee claim? I, as their lawyer, would be like, look, if you can do a study permit, I would far rather do a study permit application if I were you than I would rather go into this refugee claims process. But like the narrative publicly is like, these are bogus claims.
Hmm.
And again, not to say that there aren't bogus claims being made. Of course there are, but that shouldn't be the. Anyways, I will go off on this, so I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna run the.
But why don't we take that so that to make sure that we do cover it, which is the Soji element and the Soji
Yeah.
claims.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's not just Soji, but it's certainly predominantly that's the biggest risk. It's also like refugees who are already in the United States. So this also brings in the whole safe third country thing as
Hmm.
well, who are there and who are being quite badly persecuted, but then can't come to Canada and make a claim, even though like not at the Supreme Court of Canada, but at the lower levels of the court, there was consensus that there was not, it was not a safe third country for them. I hear stories all the time about people who, and we've had a podcast episode about this, people who spent the period of time that they were making their refugee claim in jail. And then
Hmm.
within a very short period of time, it was like, nope, sorry, you're not. And then they were deported back and then immediately ran away again because their fear was so profound. And so so yeah, in those situations, people are calling and saying, can I make a refugee claim claiming that I want to seek protection from the United States? And there are a vast array of types of cases, even people who are afraid of actual political persecution from the administration. And so, but I think that Canada is going to be braced with great fear that you allow one US claim and all of a sudden the floodgates are going to open and absolutely overwhelm the system. And so for Canada, everything about the refugee system has become about inventory.
Hmm.
We could easily fill our entire immigrant inventory with valid, viable refugee claims because that is the state of the world right now, right? But unless we're going to say, yes, we will fill our entire, whatever our levels plan is with refugee claimants, our only resolution here is to just prevent people from coming in, because if they come in, then we are obliged by international law to not return them to a place where they will suffer torture or cruel and unusual punishment.
yeah.
So our methodology has been don't let them in the first place. And
There
that's
was
essentially,
earlier this year, the federal court did overturn a transgendered individual who successfully claimed asylum in Canada. So and the judgment was sweeping enough to basically state that there will likely be, at least based on that judgment, internal flight alternatives. I actually looked the person up because they were posting on Reddit throughout all these proceedings and being quite critical of DOJ and the federal court. And as far as I can tell, they're still here. But what's interesting is the person is on Reddit telling other transgendered individuals not to come up and to go to those blue states instead of Canada.
yeah, it doesn't
Um,
surprise me at all. It's a very, very the process of going through the claim is very demoralizing. It's very rigorous. I know that people like to say that refugee claimants in Canada are getting a free handout and that it's all these resources being spent. It's incredibly demeaning, demoralizing. It's hard. I do a
Hmm.
lot of LGBTQ, like SOGS claims before the board. They're not at all fun. They're really, really tough. And I think I'm doing them from countries like Uganda, where people are fleeing with a warrant for their arrest, where their family homes
Oh,
are being broken into repeatedly. And even them, they're being cross-examined in an intense way before the board. And so
mm.
when somebody could say, well, you could go to California, like they're hard. They're very, very hard to win. And in the meantime, like the kind of blowback that people are getting from the Canadian public, from the minister's council, the minister will intervene in any claim made by an American. I'm convinced of that, which means somebody's going to be there to oppose the claim. They're going to have to deal with all this evidence being adduced by the state to say, look, this is not an unsafe place. And look, there are other places you can go. Like, it's a formidable operation to try and win such a claim.
Yeah, I mean, the
And the amount
media
of
is
money.
reporting that they may completely shut down the ability anyway to claim
Yeah,
asylum if you
exactly.
come here from the United States.
Yeah, so
Um,
make no mistake. This is not going to be like oh, great, your claim is accepted.
yeah,
Mhm.
Ryan mentioned the draft dodger scenario where then during the Vietnam War, about 50 to 100,000 Americans kind of just came up and didn't leave to avoid the Vietnam War. Jason Kenney, when he was on the podcast, said that Canada is not prepared uh, for a Trump presidency because of the likelihood of this happening again. Hard to look into the Oracle looking glass, but do you think, Ryan, that that's something we could be looking at where the border is just overwhelmed and all plans and programs just what would be the impact?
Uh, if it doesn't happen in the days following January 20th, like I think our next big spike in interest is going to be around the inauguration, and then I think it's going to go very, very quiet. Um, I I don't think that people. I think people quickly realize that as like the numbers that you're talking about to make an impact would have to be so significant and overwhelming. Um, and I just don't see, I can't imagine in my mind that many people making that sort of drastic move and thinking that things are that bad in the United States that they're going to uproot their families, leave their jobs, leave all of their social and personal connections, run with their assets, across the border in the middle. Like I just don't see that scenario playing out. I think with all these things are never as bad as um, they appear to be, and they're never as good as they appear to be either.
Hmm. That.
I think it's um, a lot of scoring points on social media with these really
Hmm.
extravagant statements about how that's it, I'm
Hmm.
leaving. So
Yeah,
I
on
think
both
we're gonna
sides for sure. As you
totally,
say,
totally,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Alberta sending sheriffs to the border and
Oh, it's wild. It's wild stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So what Deanna is referring to there is Alberta's announced in something that I think is actually similar to what the Obama administration brought in, although on a much smaller scale, which is that within 2 kilometers of the American border of Alberta, America is going to be declared critical industry, and that under, I guess, when something's designated that, they can arrest people without warrants,
This
which I
this is
assume what they're getting at are people traveling to the United States, but I mean, I guess you could arrest someone for a warrant for any purpose in that scenario.
this is Canada's "we're building a wall" moment, and I think it's gonna have as much impact as the wall that's still
Yeah.
unbuilt along the southern border of the United States. So
Yeah.
we'll see where
I
it goes. It's
really
interesting times.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comment that like there's a lot of catastrophizing going on. And I think I mean I'm key catastrophizer. Like
Yeah, I was gonna
and I
say.
think, yeah, so it's a good comment. I think that it's at the moment it's a bit like there's been a lot of things like, well, that will never happen, and they've happened. So I think
Yeah,
people are feeling very overstimulated. Like if you had told a lot of
totally.
people that, like, well, not only is Donald Trump not going to go to prison, he's going to win again. A lot of people were like, no, no. So when you're saying now, like when he's calling Canada the great province of, or the great state of Canada. You know, he's saying that, he's calling our prime minister the governor of the great state. You know, you're sort of like, so am I catastrophizing, or is
I mean,
this like,
this is right out of Art of the Deal. You know, part of his negotiation tactics are to make his opposition feel uncomfortable, unsettled. This is
yeah,
to rattle Canada, and the
Oh my
more we
God, you
talk
totally.
sound
about
like my
it,
dad, Ryan,
do
quoting the
I?
art. That's what my dad always says. Oh, you've just
Well,
got to
he's
read the art
right.
of the
You're,
deal. It will all make sense.
it will. This is his.
These
I
kind
don't
of
know.
comments are aimed at people like me who are going to be like, oh my God, the world, we're going to go
Exactly, and yeah, and like that's
right here. You know, it's
our
like,
political institutions are just as sensitive to it, and I think it's something that we
yeah,
just sort of have to like,
we have
you
to
know, take with
chill.
take with a massive grain of salt. You know, yeah, deep breaths, everyone.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you.
I don't think it's actually going to. I don't. If we need, Dan, if we need to, I'll lead the charge to burn down the White House again.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I'm
So
not making a Leah. I am definitely not doing
yeah,
that. I'm like, it's like
Going to be the
I've
War of 1812.
whoa, yeah. I
I
don't know. I'm gonna go to Panama. I'm there,
so
Jamaica. I
let
don't
me
know
tell you
what I'm
something really
doing.
interesting. There's a U.S. immigration lawyer that we've done a lot of work with over the years, and we send files back and forth. And
Yeah,
I reached out to him when this Trumpugees stuff was blowing up. I'm like, tell me, like, what's it looking like going southbound? He goes, Ryan, you wouldn't believe it, how many Canadians want to leave Canada because of Trudeau
yeah,
UGs. You know, this is
yeah.
um
I'm a Trudeau UG.
everyone. So you're going to move
Trudeau
to the
G.
States. So
Yeah,
like these are people who want to leave Canada, and he said they're all business owners, they're all wealthy, and the United States is welcoming them. They're getting them in, they're getting their work permits, they're setting up their businesses. It's a more friendly tax environment. All of these things are driving business out of Canada. So for every Canadian for every American that wants to come here, there's probably a Canadian who wants to go the other way. And I think we should
Yeah, it's
just
record
like,
immigration down there. There's a U.S.
yeah,
Well, there's a Canadian immigration lawyer who moved to the United States because of the COVID restrictions up there, who's almost convinces me that I'm crazy for not being in Florida every time I talk to
right?
him.
yeah,
Yeah,
Like,
so there's it's all like, this is all in the eye of the beholder. Like there's
yeah, yeah,
and maybe we should just do a big trade, you know, line everyone
yeah,
up, do a
yeah.
big passport swap,
Exactly.
you know, do a reciprocity PR
That's
program.
amazing.
Wouldn't that be a great
Yeah,
solution for this? And
yeah,
just settle
exactly.
everyone down. You live where you want to live, we'll live where we want to live,
We'll
and everyone
trade
can be happy.
passports. That's a
Exactly.
wonderful idea, actually.
Right?
We'll
like
trade
couch
Neutral,
surfing.
passports with like,
cost neutral, you know,
yeah, exactly. I'll go to
doesn't
the
impact
countries where
housing.
some of my clients will be persecuted. I'm a white person, so I'd probably do okay over there. They would be able to stay here and maybe be more secure. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think it's like that sort of thing.
So there are kind of just looking at the time, there are policymakers who do listen to the podcast. If you did have to give a suggestion, either from an immigration standpoint on handling a Trump administration or just a more business friendly, or what would your recommendations be to the department going into 2025, assuming that we also want to respect the goal that they have of shrinking the population?
Yeah, I think it's just a
That's
matter
just
of
a
not.
little question.
Yeah, right. Like let me think about this for a
No
couple of hours and
pressure.
get back to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that we just have to be very careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I
Yeah.
think there's some really great pieces that work really well, and we need to guard
Can
and
you give me
protect
an
those pieces.
example? Just
Port of entry work permit applications.
okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
like that's an easy one, and just, you know, facilitating business, facilitating commerce across the border.
Okay.
You know, using visas as uh, it's interesting because if these tariffs come up and trade is reduced, there will be a drop in the number of work permits applied for because there's fewer people needed to facilitate on both sides of the border with that reduced trade. So I would just say just, you know, give your heads you know, the one thing that's driven me the most crazy about this government's approach to immigration policy planning has been the headline chasing. And
Hmm.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how many bespoke programs do we have because of whatever? You know, and there's a warm and fuzzy reason or a humanitarian reason attached to every single one of them. But it's wild that these are taking away from other priorities in the way that they are. So stop chasing headlines. So don't design your policies around another country's BS, and don't drop the things that work. Like build on
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Well, and one of the
yeah,
things that PSAC, I think, was saying in the Toronto Star was that every time there's a new program introduced, all the officers have to stop
Yeah.
processing the files. They have to go into training, learn the new program. They fall further behind on everything.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
But also a lot of those programs are not like they're not really even worth the paper that they're written
So
on.
why
They're
do
a
we have
joke.
them, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
so like
exactly.
they're chasing that publicity. That's it.
Yeah, the
Canada is
Gaza program,
supporting
like,
the
are there
family
anybody?
members of people who were on a flight that crashed 10 years. Like it's like, okay, great, let's support those people. Do we need a program? Like,
Yeah.
is this like, do we
Just
have to
just grant
formalize it?
some ministerial relief,
Like
you know,
yeah,
like
do
I'm
one
biting my
umbrella
tongue on
who's
the
program.
out of status
insisting?
construction workers.
You know,
Yes.
I've got
no,
to
you're
at least.
not
Yeah.
actually, just saying.
I mean, the other thing that right now is like the department, and we talked about this with Jason Kenney as well, that like Mark Miller has said that he's been overruled on that amnesty program. And actually, we're seeing it a bit right now with all the rumors that Chrystia Freeland wasn't even consulted apparently on the tax break for the holidays and the $250 check. And if the department feels a little bit rudderless, it's probably because it's not clear who's running
Right.
and driving policy. Because right now things do feel like, well, yeah, the
Man,
minister has said he's clearly not in charge. And it's who is.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
the algorithm on X. That's who's in charge.
The
That's
algorithm on X. It's whoever was running the Biden government secretly all the.
Yeah. Yeah, very strange times.
yeah.
But yeah, deep breaths.
Oh, go for it. You were going to say something?
No, I was just taking a deep breath.
Oh, just
It
awesome.
just looked a bit like a panic, yeah.
Yeah, right.
On that note, I think we've told Americans at least that they need a bespoke approach and not to assume that they can just drive with all their belongings to the Canadian border and be greeted with a welcome bienvenue. And
No.
on that, Ryan, thanks for coming on
Yeah, thanks
finally.
for having it on. It was fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
I'm
was really
sure
good
that
fun.
some of the
Yeah,
employees that are listening with their ears to your door.
your door
So
too.
I'm sure. Well, I do this every week. Okay, cheers, guys.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good
Bye.
one.
Ciao.
Bye.